Before we dive into today's disturbing investigation, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because what you're about to hear will challenge everything you thought you knew about trust, authority, and how easily one small decision can spiral into absolute horror. And if this story shocks you as much as it shocked me, leave a like so more people can see this. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever made a decision that seemed completely innocent at the time? Maybe you took a different route home from work. Maybe you answered a message from a stranger. Maybe you agreed to help someone you barely knew. These tiny choices, they happen every single day. We don't think about them. We certainly don't imagine they could change everything. But what if I told you that one of these small decisions, something that took less than 5 seconds to make, could lead to your death? Or worse, could turn you into a monster? That's not hypothetical. That's not a thought experiment. That's exactly what happened in the cases we're going to examine today. Let me take you back to November 2025, Pennsylvania. A volunteer at Mount Moriah Cemetery noticed something disturbing. One of the old family mausoleums had been broken into, not just opened, but violently breached. Cinder blocks smashed, marble floor torn apart. Someone had descended nearly 10 feet below ground level using a rope. And when investigators looked inside, they found something chilling. The crypt belonging to Martha Hunter, a child who died in 1869, had been forced open. Her remains were gone. Her clothing vanished. This wasn't grave robbery in the traditional sense. This wasn't about stealing jewelry or valuables buried with the dead. This was something far more disturbing. Someone was stealing the bodies themselves. Over the next few weeks, the pattern continued. Different mausoleums, different families, different time periods. The perpetrator didn't seem to care whether the deceased had been buried for 5 years or 150. All that mattered were the remains. And with each break-in, the thief became sloppier. Energy drink cans left behind, cigarette butts, even a screwdriver with a name carved into it. Brian. But here's where it gets truly unsettling. Because while police were investigating these cemetery violations, something else was happening. On Instagram, a strange account had appeared. It featured artistic photographs of human skulls and bones, professional lighting, careful composition, and a caption that read, "If you know, you know, skulls and bones available, DM to inquire." Pause for a moment and think about that. Someone wasn't just stealing bodies from their final resting place. They were photographing them, selling them, treating human remains like collectible merchandise. And people were buying. The account belonged to Jonathan Gerlach, and by the time police connected the dots between the cemetery thefts and his Instagram presence, he had already stolen 61 confirmed bodies. 61 people who had been laid to rest by grieving families. 61 graves violated, some of them children. One of them, an infant, just 6 months old. Gerlach posted about this child. He wrote, "This precious little one, just 3 or 4 years old, has recently come under my guardianship to be honored and preserved." Honored, preserved, as if ripping a child's body from its grave and photographing it for profit could ever be considered respectful. If you're feeling disgusted right now, good. You should be. And if you want to make sure more people hear this story, hit that like button and drop a comment. telling me what you think should happen to someone who does this. But Gerlach's Instagram revealed something even more troubling. In his earlier posts, he repeatedly used the phrase ethically sourced and acquired when describing both human and animal remains. He sold a Bengal tiger skull for $2,000. He displayed the remains of kittens, leopards, other exotic animals, and for a while, he claimed everything was legal, ethical, above board. Then something changed. In his later posts, particularly those from the period when the grave robbing was taking place, that phrase disappeared. No more claims of ethical sourcing, no more reassurances, just listings, just sales, just DM to inquire. Here's something most people don't know. In the United States, there's actually no federal law prohibiting the sale of human remains, with specific exceptions for Native American ancestral remains. If you own an antique skull from the 18th or 19th century, you can legally sell it to the general public. Medical institutions can purchase donor skulls through legitimate channels for educational purposes. There's a company called Skulls Unlimited that legally processes human remains obtained through body donation programs, though they only sell to verified professionals. So Gerlach operated in this strange legal gray area. Owning and selling human bones isn't necessarily illegal. What matters is how those remains were acquired. And that's where everything falls apart, because Gerlach didn't acquire these remains ethically. He stole them from graves. He violated sacred resting places. He took bodies that families had buried with love, ceremony, and the expectation that they would never be disturbed. You can tell the difference, actually, between legally obtained remains and those stolen from graves. Donated anatomical specimens show signs of preparation. Drilled holes, varnish, metal fittings. They're clean, standardized, clearly prepared for medical study. But remains taken directly from burial sites? They show soil staining, root etching, microfractures from long-term burial, sometimes fragments of coffin wood or fabric still attached, sometimes, disturbingly, remnants of the person themselves, hair, tissue, evidence of decomposition. Gerlach posted photographs showing exactly these signs. One skull with nasal hair, facial hair, eyebrows, eyelashes still visible. Another with remnants of eyes in the orbital sockets. Visible hair on the skull itself. Signs of decomposition consistent with being buried in the ground. These weren't medical specimens. These were people recently exhumed, photographed, and sold. And people defended him. Online, after his story broke, users actually argued that what he did wasn't that bad. They said the deceased had been dead for so long that no one cared anymore. They said if they personally were dead for hundreds of years, they wouldn't mind being dug up and photographed. One user wrote, "If I had been dead for so long that the world and any potential living relatives had long since gone themselves, I wouldn't be offended if some dude dug me up and took a few cool photos." Let me be absolutely clear about why this argument fails. Because it's not about what you personally would want. It's about respecting the wishes of the deceased and their families. Different cultures, different religions, different individuals have different beliefs about the sanctity of remains and what should happen after death. Some people donate their bodies to science. Some choose cremation. Some choose burial with the explicit expectation that their body will remain undisturbed. When someone is laid to rest in a cemetery, we can reasonably assume they didn't consent to being harvested for bones and sold on Instagram. Breaking into crypts, stealing bodies. This isn't respectful. This isn't honoring the dead. This is violation. This is desecration. This is treating human beings like objects, like property, like merchandise. Let me tell you how they caught him, because this is where the investigation gets interesting. Police had been tracking energy drink cans, cigarette butts, DNA samples. They'd found that screwdriver with Brian carved into it. They'd discovered broken wooden pallets propped upright, used as makeshift ladders to climb in and out of underground vaults. But they didn't have a suspect. Then they received a tip. Someone who knew Gerlach's family mentioned that he'd recently been discovered with a partially decomposed corpse hanging in his basement. The family was afraid to tell police. Think about that. They saw a decomposing human body in his home and were too frightened to report it. Police started digging. They found that Gerlach had been charged with shoplifting tools from a hardware store, a headlamp, a rechargeable LED glow stick, a hammer drill bit, work gloves, a metal cutting wheel. Total value, about $167. During the same visit, he'd paid for over $250 worth of other merchandise. He specifically stole the tools commonly associated with burglaries. They also found his Instagram account. 147 posts. Only 2 showed Gerlach himself. The rest depicted human and animal remains. His most recent post from January 5th, 2026. If you know, you know. Skulls and bones available. DM to inquire. Among his Instagram followers was someone named Brian, the same name etched into that screwdriver found at the crime scene. According to the tip, Brian had disappeared for several days in November and later mentioned he'd been in Chicago selling a human skull. Was Gerlach working with an accomplice? Had he built a network of body snatchers and bone dealers? Police began tracking Gerlach's movements using license plate readers. His Toyota RAV4 had traveled into or near the areas where bodies were stolen on at least 5 occasions between November 2nd and December 17th. Cell phone records placed him in those same areas at the same times. On December 23rd, an officer on patrol at Mount Moriah found his RAV4 parked between 2 fallen tree limbs inside the cemetery. The positioning seemed intentional, meant to conceal the vehicle. Multiple energy drink cans were visible on the front passenger seat. Then, on January 6th, 2026, detectives patrolling Mount Moriah again found Gerlach's vehicle parked near the cemetery. This time, they reported seeing human skulls and bones in the back seat. They arrested him shortly afterward when they observed him walking back toward the vehicle carrying a crowbar and a burlap sack. Inside the sack was a child's mummified remains. When police executed a search warrant at Gerlach's home, they found over 100 human skulls, numerous human long bones, mummified human feet and hands, 2 decomposing human torsos, and other assorted skeletal items. His house was essentially a charnel house, a tomb filled with stolen bodies. A leaked video allegedly from inside his house surfaced online. I'm not going to describe it in detail, but I'll tell you this. At one point in the footage, someone wearing a firearm in a holster, likely police, walks through the scene. The video shows a couch that matches the fabric and design seen in the background of Gerlach's skull photographs, and there's a visible pacemaker in the footage. A Reddit user who examined it noted, "That is definitely a real pacemaker design. Looks like a Medtronic or a Boston Scientific. That specific set of remains will be able to be identified at least. District Attorney Tanner Rouse spoke at a press conference. He said, "It is truly, in the most literal sense of the word, horrific. I grieve for those who are upset by this, who are going through it, who are trying to figure out if it is in fact their loved one or their child, because we found remains that we believe to be months-old infants among those that he had collected." Chief of Yeadon Borough Police Henry Jaworski added, "After 30 years, I can say this is probably the most horrific thing that I've seen. To the families, we all have loved ones that passed. Rest in peace is rest in peace." This definitely tears your heartstrings, especially when you see an infant. Jonathan Gerlach was charged with 489 criminal counts, 100 counts of corpse abuse. Additional charges including theft, burglary, intentional desecration of venerated objects, trespassing, criminal mischief, receiving stolen property, and desecration of historic burial sites. He was held on $1 million bail. And here's the question that haunts me. What was the small decision that led to this? Was it the first time Gerlach looked at a photograph of a human skull and thought, "I could sell that"? Was it the moment he decided to visit Mount Moriah Cemetery and noticed how run down and unmonitored it was? Was it the first time he broke into a mausoleum and realized no one was watching? One small decision, one moment where he chose to cross a line, and it led to 61 violated graves, 61 families devastated, 61 people who can never rest in peace because their remains are scattered, sold, photographed, displayed like trophies. If this story is disturbing you, if you're thinking about the fragility of the choices we make every day, leave a comment. Tell me what you're thinking, because we're just getting started. Let me transition now to a very different kind of story, but one that follows the same theme, a small decision that changed everything. Ryan Wedding was an Olympic snowboarder. Let that sink in for a moment. He represented Canada at the 2002 Winter Olympics in Salt Lake City. He competed across the Alps and Andes. He won bronze at the Junior World Championships. Commentators compared him to Ross Rebagliati, Canada's Olympic gold medalist. Ryan Wedding had talent, discipline, focus, everything you need to succeed. But on the day of his Olympic race, the weather changed. The snow softened, turned watery. His line was off. He finished 24th, 1 second short of qualifying for the next round. Years of training, all leading to that one moment. And in an instant, it was gone. What happened next is a case study in how one disappointment can redirect an entire life. After Salt Lake City, Wedding enrolled at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver. But instead of channeling his drive into academics, he focused on building his body. The slim Olympian became stockier, stronger. He began working nights as a bouncer, and that's where the small decision happened. Working at a club during the early 2000s, when Vancouver was on the brink of a gang war. A fight for control over the marijuana trade. Ryan Wedding, bouncer, started making friends with the same people he'd been hired to keep out. Friends with connections. Connections with opportunity. His girlfriend at the time noticed the shift from the quiet family type who didn't care about status or appearance to a man wearing Prada shoes and Breitling watches. After 2 years of college, Ryan dropped out. With a $250,000 loan from his father, he bought and resold a house in Maple Ridge. The profit funded a luxurious apartment with high ceilings, a pinball machine, and a racing seat gaming setup. In the garage, snowmobiles, a Ducati, a BMW M5. But here's the thing, even with the profit from reselling that house, this lifestyle was too expensive for a bouncer. So Wedding turned to something else. His friend owned a property called 18 Carat Farms. They weren't growing carrots. They were cultivating 8,000 marijuana plants. Twice a month, Ryan drove out, tended to the plants, delivered product to a supplier. The operation pulled in hundreds of thousands a year, maybe more. But it was also pulling a lot of electricity, 2,000 kilowatt hours a month, far more than any typical warehouse. By summer 2006, authorities raided the property. They found loaded guns in a locked safe, 6,800 cannabis plants, 86 pounds of dried marijuana, estimated value $10 million. The largest grow farm uncovered in Maple Ridge. But they never charged Ryan Wedding. Only a confidential informant linked him to the site, and that wasn't enough. Between 1997 and 2003, British Columbia law enforcement investigated roughly 25,000 grow ops. They couldn't keep up. The priority shifted from prosecution to just shutting places down. So Ryan Wedding walked away. And that was another small decision. The moment authorities decided not to pursue charges, the moment they let him go. Because that decision gave Wedding the confidence to go bigger. In fall 2007, Wedding befriended Hassan Shirini, a Persian Canadian known to police since 1997. Shirini opened a new door for Ryan, the Hawala Network, a trust-based money transferring system dating back to the 8th century, still operating around the world today. It's efficient, discreet, and global. And because it moves outside banks and traditional channels, the network can be exploited for criminal purposes. By 2007, Wedding was telling friends he was broke. He'd lost roughly $500,000 on a shady real estate deal and, per Shirini's later testimony, another $300,000 on a cocaine deal gone bad. Wedding approached Shirini about buying cocaine in California. He could front about $340,000. They arranged to try for 24 kilos from a contact in Los Angeles. If it worked, they'd keep going. But from the moment they arrived in LA, the FBI was watching. The exchange ran through 2 Russians. One of them, Yuri Trofimov, was an ex-KGB agent, a man whose reputation alone scared most people. When he met them at the airport, he demanded to see the cash. He was told they needed a few days to access it. Angry, he still agreed to the plan. Sell them a single kilo, then the rest later. On June 13th, 2008, as soon as the Russian handed over $17,000 for 1 kilo, agents moved in. Wedding and Shirini were arrested. With hours of recorded calls and meetings against them, Shirini and the Russian agreed to plea deals. But Ryan Wedding declined to cooperate. An FBI agent named Brett Keena told Rolling Stone, "He was very controlled. Once we read him his rights, he didn't say anything. In the few instances that we did have the chance to interact with him, he was kinda like, you know, you're not getting anything from me." During his trial, Wedding's lawyer argued that Shirini had brought Wedding along as the fall guy, that when conspirators discussed business, they often spoke Farsi or Russian, languages Ryan didn't understand. And when speaking English, they used code, referring to drugs as cars. Perhaps, the lawyer suggested, Wedding really believed he was in Los Angeles to buy automobiles. The jury didn't buy it. Ryan Wedding was convicted of conspiring to traffic cocaine. The mandatory minimum was 10 years. But during the 2 years between arrest and conviction, Wedding was held at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in San Diego. a place that, for him, seemed to do more training than correcting. Agent Brett Keena admitted, "You've got people that are in that facility that have amazing drug world connections. We really did just turn him into a much better drug dealer than he was when he started with us." The Metropolitan Correctional Center holds inmates awaiting trial or sentencing for federal offenses, lower-level members of Mexican drug trafficking organizations, mules who specialize in moving drugs across the border. While there, Wedding organized up to 5 girlfriends back home to wash his car, clean his apartment, and collect money from associates. He also phoned male associates, boasting about the good connections he was making in custody. Meanwhile, in court, he told the judge, "What I did was completely out of character for me, and it is a personal mission of mine to rebuild my reputation." The court imposed a lower term than initially intended, 48 months minus time served. Ryan Wedding hadn't lied to the court, at least not entirely. He did plan to rebuild, but it wouldn't be the kind of rehabilitation the judge had in mind. When Wedding returned to Canada, he settled in Montreal. The drug trade, once dominated by the mafia, was now open territory. By the early 2010s, one drug kingpin was already making inroads into Canada: Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. Under his command, the Sinaloa cartel expanded into one of the largest drug smuggling networks in history, operating in more than 50 countries, responsible for the bulk of narcotics crossing the US-Mexico border. In the 2010s, its attention turned north. Canada, with its high street prices and relatively light federal drug enforcement compared to the US, was seen as a strategic safe zone, a place where cartel operatives could meet international partners and arrange shipments. The cartel's expansion into Canada caught American authorities off guard. Cocaine shipments were smuggled across the border into Arizona, stored in warehouses in Tucson or Phoenix, then transported by vehicle to the Washington-British Columbia border. From there, drugs were loaded onto helicopters and dropped into forested areas on the Canadian side. But law enforcement had plans of their own. An undercover officer, identified in court records only as Joe, infiltrated Canada's underground drug market. Operation Harrington, designed specifically to disrupt the cocaine pipeline between Mexico and Canada. By February 2014, Ryan Wedding had filed for bankruptcy. In a sworn statement, he claimed to be unemployed. He was leasing a new Ford F-350 pickup and living in a gated condo complex with his wife. Despite this, Wedding declared that neither of them had any income. On paper, he was relying solely on financial support from family members. Privately, something else was underway. In January 2015, undercover officer Joe traveled to Montreal to meet with a man named Filipos Colaros, identified in court documents as having direct ties to El Chapo. At their meeting, Colaros told Joe he'd brought the man in charge. Moments later, Ryan Wedding walked in and introduced himself as a cocaine importer. Wedding asked detailed questions about boat capacity, mapped out transfer routes. Together, they devised a plan. A large research vessel would collect a shipment from St. Domingue Kitts, then transfer it mid-sea to a fleet of smaller fishing trawlers, which would deliver the load discreetly to shore in Newfoundland. They agreed on a test run. Between 500 and 1,000 kilograms of cocaine. Joe would take a 25% cut of the shipment's value as his fee. But before anything could move forward, the plan was shut down. On April 20th, 2015, the RCMP launched coordinated raids across Canada and issued 15 arrest warrants. Among those named were Ryan Wedding, and Philippos Kolaros. It remains unclear whether Kolaros cooperated with the Crown, but in the end, he served just 1 day in prison. The rest was covered by time already spent in custody. Then, on the evening of November 7th, 2018, Kolaros was sitting in a coffee shop in Montreal's Little Italy when a man entered and shot him. He died that night in the hospital. The murder was never solved. But there was one clear person of interest, someone with motive and reason to fear what Kolaros might say to authorities: Ryan Wedding. When the RCMP arrived at his Montreal condo in 2015 to make the arrest, he was already gone. Authorities believe he fled the country and went straight into the protection of the Sinaloa cartel. And that's when Ryan Wedding became truly dangerous, because now he wasn't just a drug dealer. He was a cartel operative with resources, connections, and protection. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, Ryan Wedding expanded his drug smuggling operation into a billion-dollar enterprise, moving an estimated 60 tons of cocaine each year, valued at nearly $500 million, primarily through the United States and into Canada. He accumulated a series of aliases: R.W., James Conrad King, Buddy, Giant, Public Enemy, El Toro, El Jefe. Behind the scenes, Wedding constructed a network, people he could trust to carry out orders and keep the supply chain moving. One of them was Andrew Clark, a Toronto-based elevator mechanic in his 30s who had relocated to Mexico in 2022. Clark took interest in a young man named Malik Cunningham, who had just been released from the Toronto South Detention Center. Clark arranged for Cunningham to travel to Mexico, where he underwent weapons training, ranging from small arms to long-range rifles, under a program modeled on military instruction. Once trained, he was sent back to Canada with names. His first assignment came with a payment of $100,000. The target, Randy Fader, a 29-year-old American-Canadian citizen. On April 1st, 2024, Cunningham traveled to Fader's home in Nigeria and shot him at close range in his driveway before fleeing. With that killing carried out, Clark began preparing Cunningham for additional jobs. One contact offered $200,000 to kill a real estate agent in Vancouver. Another promised more than twice that amount for a group in Toronto. A third listed a target in Dubai for $1 million. All were described as enemies of El Jefe. Then on April 14th, 2024, Cunningham made a critical mistake. He was spotted driving the same vehicle he'd used in the Fader shooting. Officers from York Regional Police approached and took him into custody. Inside the car, they found 4 mobile phones, multiple rounds of ammunition, and $100,000 in cash. When investigators searched the devices, they uncovered encrypted messages exchanged between Cunningham and Clark. Messages that prosecutors say laid out the structure and scope of the murder-for-hire plot. This was the beginning of the FBI's Operation Giant Slalom. More arrests followed. Andrew Clark was arrested on October 8th in a restaurant in Guadalajara on 11 charges, including conspiracy to possess, export, and distribute cocaine, 4 counts of murder, and 1 count of attempted murder. He was later extradited to the United States. In total, 14 men were arrested, 8 of them Canadian. But Ryan Wedding remained at large. On the morning of November 20th, 2023, 28-year-old Jasprit Kaur Sidhu was woken by her father, Jagtar Singh Sidhu, 57. They had argued days earlier, but that morning there was urgency in his voice. He told her, "If we don't talk today, it will be never." Before leaving, he said, "Remember one thing. The day I die, I will tell myself that I love my daughter more than anyone else in this world. Jagtar and his wife, Harbhajan Kaur Sidhu, 55, had been visiting from India for 4 months. They were staying with Jasprit and her brother Garrett at their rental home near the Caledon-Brampton border. The couple planned to return to India in January. Until then, their visit had been peaceful. But late that night, around 11:30 p.m., everything changed. Jasprit was getting ready for bed when she saw a man standing in the hallway. She saw her father collapse from gunfire, heard her mother scream, and then there was complete silence except for the noise of gunshots. Downstairs, her close friend had heard the gunfire. He rushed outside and saw the shooter flee in the back of a pickup truck with at least one other person inside. When they were gone, he returned to the house to find Jagtar motionless outside the bathroom. There was no pulse. His wife, Harbhajan, shot multiple times, was still breathing, but barely. Police arrived nearly 20 minutes after the first 911 call. The ambulance took another 10 minutes. Harbhajan, who had been shot a total of 22 times, died in the hospital nearly 2 weeks later. Her daughter, Jasprit, shot 13 times, survived. Most of the bullets were removed, but one remains lodged in her spine. Doctors determined that removing it would carry a high risk of paralysis or coma. At first, investigators were at a loss. Why would someone target a quiet, ordinary family with such brutality? The answer came later when the investigation was handed over to the FBI. According to agents, the Sidhus were targeted by mistake. The shooter, still unidentified, was working for Ryan Wedding. He had been sent in response to a stolen drug shipment. The Sidhus had nothing to do with it. Jasprit spent 7 months in the hospital. When she finally stood again, she needed assistance with even routine tasks. She says she still hears her mother's screams every day. "I can never forget that," she said. Speaking about Wedding, her words were clear. He will have to face his karma. On March 6, 2025, Ryan Wedding was officially added to the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list. The U.S. Department of State announced a reward of up to $10 million for information leading to his arrest or conviction. Authorities believe Wedding is currently in Mexico, but his presence in the United States, Canada, Colombia, Honduras, Guatemala, Costa Rica, and other locations has not been ruled out. He is described as 6'3", approximately 240 pounds. His eyes are blue, his hair brown, and he may be wearing a beard or mustache. Think about that for a moment. An Olympic athlete, a man who represented his country on the world stage, a man with talent, discipline, and every opportunity to succeed. And one moment of disappointment, one decision to walk away from his sport and into a Vancouver nightclub led to a billion-dollar drug empire and dozens of murders. One small decision. If you're still watching, I need you to do something. Comment below and tell me, what's the smallest decision you've ever made that changed your life? Maybe it was good, maybe it was bad, but I want to hear from you. Because understanding how these moments shape us is the only way we can recognize them before it's too late. And while you're at it, make sure you're subscribed. Because we're not even halfway through today's investigation. Let me tell you now about a case that's even more disturbing. Because it's not about a lone criminal. It's about criminals who were supposed to protect us, who took an oath, who wore a badge, and who used that badge to commit murder. Luis Ippolito and Stephen Caracappa were NYPD detectives. They worked in the Brooklyn robbery squad. On paper, they were a mismatch. Ippolito was loud, impulsive, quick to anger. Caracappa was quiet, methodical, efficient. But somehow, they made it work. Maybe because they shared something deeper. A familiarity with the world they were supposed to be fighting. Ippolito had grown up surrounded by it. His father and uncles were all members of the Gambino crime family. Caracappa's connection was more circumstantial, but no less real. He lived across the street from Tommy Gambino, the future Gambino underboss. The two stayed in touch for years. Working side by side, the two discovered a shared understanding, an unspoken rule that the line between cop and criminal could bend when it suited them. Ippolito had his own way of enforcing order. By his own admission, his partner once had to stop him from beating a suspect to death. He once said, "The public will never understand the mentality of a cop, a good cop anyway. In a way, it's very similar to the mentality of organized crime. You do what you have to do and don't think twice about consequences." In 1978, while working undercover in narcotics, Caracappa built a case against a dealer. But when the dealer was arrested, Caracappa didn't stop there. He visited the dealer's wife, who was out on bail, and told her, "You know, I can help your husband when it comes time for trial. Remember, I'm holding all the aces." According to her, he later drove her to a motel near the highway where he assaulted her. Afterward, he told her, "If you say anything, no one's going to believe you." And he was right. For nearly 3 decades, both men would use their badges to protect themselves from suspicion and to hide what they really were: killers for hire. On the afternoon of November 4th, 1986, Peter Mitchell, a 29-year-old former Marine, was running along the Belt Parkway in Brooklyn when he saw a gray Oldsmobile pulled to the side of the road. Inside sat an older, heavy-set white man with graying hair. Beside him, a young black woman in a brown fur coat, staring blankly toward Jamaica Bay with what Mitchell described as a dead stare. Mitchell ran on, but when he circled back about 40 minutes later, the same car was parked in a grassy area near a horseback riding school. He watched as the driver got out, walked around, and began pulling something from the passenger side. At first, Mitchell thought it was garbage, until he saw a pair of legs. The man dragged the woman's body to a tree, covered her with a quilt, and scattered beer cans around her. Then he looked up and saw Mitchell watching. Without panic, the man got back in his car and drove off. The victim was Virginia Robertson, a 27-year-old mother who had been strangled. Mitchell, an African American, was uncomfortable with the police. He knew that even an innocent man could get locked away for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But he stayed, called 911, and waited. The first detective on the scene collected evidence and took Mitchell's statement. The description he gave matched a local car thief with known mafia ties. But before the detective could follow up, Luis Ippolito arrived. Ippolito immediately sent everyone home. When Mitchell pointed out beer cans near the body, possible fingerprints, Ippolito tossed them in the trash. Mitchell went over the description again, but Ippolito didn't seem interested. Instead, that evening, he drove Mitchell to a nearby housing project, pointed to a man walking out, and said, "That's him." Mitchell said, "No, it wasn't." But Ippolito pressed harder. Back at the station, the tone shifted. Ippolito leaned in close, telling Mitchell that the man, Barry Gibbs, was dangerous. that he'd hurt people before. Mitchell kept insisting it wasn't him. Then Ippolito changed tactics, showing off his medals and commendations before turning to threats. He said he knew where Mitchell's family lived and wondered aloud what might happen if police found drugs in their homes. Then he made it clear, "You're going to do this or else." After 6 hours of pressure, Peter Mitchell gave in. A few days later, Barry Gibbs, a mailman and Navy veteran who had fallen into addiction, was arrested outside his apartment. He maintained his innocence. He didn't even ask for a lawyer. "An innocent man has nothing to hide," he said later. "What do I need a lawyer for? I didn't do anything." But at the lineup, Mitchell identified him. The following year, he testified against him while Ippolito watched from the back of the courtroom. With no DNA, no fingerprints, no proof whatsoever, the jury relied fully on that testimony. Barry Gibbs was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 20 years to life. It never became clear what Ippolito's motive was. Was it to boost his own reputation? To protect a mafia member? To gain their trust? Whatever his motive was, there was no going back anymore. For Louis Ippolito and Stephen Caracappa, being detectives wasn't enough. They wanted more: money, power, the same respect that a man in the mafia commanded. So Ippolito turned to his family. His cousin, Frank Santora, a Gambino associate, started asking around for anyone who might need help from two well-placed NYPD detectives. While serving time in federal prison, Santora had formed a friendship with Bert Kaplan, a Jewish mobster who operated by the same codes as the mafia itself. Kaplan was disciplined, business-minded, and loyal to the Lucchese family. When Santora mentioned his cousin and his cousin's partner, Kaplan listened. Santora said they were willing to do business on the side, and if Kaplan had any serious problem, they were capable of doing a murder. Kaplan hesitated. He'd been around long enough to know that doing business with a cop, no matter how dirty, was dangerous. Still, the offer stayed in the back of his mind, and not long after, the opportunity to use their services would come. On August 2nd, 1985, Israel Greenwald stepped off a flight from London and into the hands of the FBI. Greenwald, a 35-year-old diamond dealer from Queens, had unknowingly cashed 2 stolen U.S. Treasury bills for a man named Herman Tabak, who was secretly working in partnership with Bert Kaplan. When Greenwald presented his passport at the airport, agents pulled him aside. He told investigators he didn't know the bills were stolen. Agent Beverly Bertzer believed he might be telling the truth. She asked him to stay in contact. Days later, Herman Tabak showed up at Greenwald's house, warning him not to talk to anyone or he would be sorry. Agent Bertzer urged Greenwald to cooperate. He agreed to wear a recorder for a follow-up meeting with Tabak, but the plan fell apart when Tabak discovered the device. The FBI decided to pause the case and let things die down. Months passed. In February 1986, Bertzer called Greenwald's attorney to restart the operation. 6 days later, the lawyer called back. Greenwald was missing. Behind the scenes, Tabak had already warned Bert Kaplan that Greenwald might be talking to police. Kaplan reached out to his old prison friend, Frank Santora. Within days, detectives Louis Ippolito and Stephen Caracappa had pulled Greenwald's address, car model, and license plate number. On February 10th, 1986, as Greenwald was driving home, the 2 detectives appeared behind him with flashing lights. They told him he was wanted in connection with a hit and run and needed to come in for a lineup. He got into their car without hesitation, but they never took him to the station. That same afternoon, they met Santora at an auto repair lot on Nostrand Avenue. Inside the garage, they killed Israel Greenwald. Santora opened his trunk, took out 2 shovels, and told the garage owner, Peter Franzone, to dig. Franzone later said, "Frankie told me that I got to help bury the body because I'm an accessory, and if I didn't help him, if I go and tell anybody, that he would kill me and my effing family." Franzone dug a 5-foot hole into the dirt floor. They placed Greenwald's body inside, poured lime over it, and sealed the grave with concrete. That night, Greenwald's wife, Leah, waited for him to return home. When he didn't, she called police. The FBI later found his car abandoned in long-term parking at JFK Airport and assumed he'd run. But Leah refused to believe it. For the next 20 years, she and her 2 daughters lived without answers. No body, no evidence, no closure. The murder of Israel Greenwald was a test run, proof that Louis Ippolito and Stephen Caracappa would really be up for the job. For Burt Kaplan, and by extension the Lucchese family, the detectives were a new kind of weapon. The mafia already had hitmen, but these 2 had badges. Later, when Anthony Gaspipe Casso, underboss of the Lucchese family, was looking to enact revenge after a failed attempt on his life, he turned to Burt Kaplan, who offered his 2 murder cops for hire. Ippolito and Caracappa had easy access to police files. Inside was a report naming suspects and their addresses. On October 18, 1986, the 2 detectives found Jimmy Heidel. They flashed their badges, handcuffed him, and told him he was wanted for questioning. Heidel, probably thinking this was an official police inquiry, was cooperative. But as the drive went on, he eventually realized they weren't heading toward a precinct. Instead, they took him to the same garage where they had taken Israel Greenwald. Inside waited Frank Santora. Jimmy Heidel was never seen again. But this wasn't the end of Casso's revenge. 2 more names remained on his list: Nicky Guido and Bobby Borriello. According to Burt Kaplan, when Casso asked for Guido's address, Detective Ippolito demanded an extra $4,000. Casso found that greedy and refused, so the detectives eventually gave him the address. On Christmas Day, 26-year-old Nicky Guido stepped out to show his uncle his new car. As they sat side by side in the vehicle, Nicky was pointing out dashboard controls when 2 men approached, raised their guns, and fired through the windshield. Nicky Guido threw himself over his uncle, shielding him, and died seconds later. The thing is, he wasn't the Nicky Guido the hitman had been sent to kill. There were 2 men named Nicholas Guido, 3 years apart, living in nearby Brooklyn neighborhoods. Ippolito and Caracappa gave Casso the wrong address and caused the death of a completely innocent young man. Nicky Guido's mother kept his room untouched until her own death, blaming herself for naming him in the Italian tradition after her father. When asked about the murder years later, Casso shrugged. "Hey, it's a mistake. No big deal." Let me pause here and ask you something. If you're feeling angry right now, if you're disgusted by what these so-called detectives did, leave a comment. Tell me what you think justice should look like for people who betray their oath like this, because we're about to see how they finally got caught. Anthony Casso went into hiding in 1990. From his hideout in Mount Olive, New Jersey, he ordered more than 30 killings, guided by his crystal ball. That was his nickname for his mole inside the NYPD. The turncoat detective whose identity was a mystery, even to Casso himself. For years, that mole fed Casso classified information, surveillance updates, wiretap locations, names of informants, 3 of whom were later killed. And more than that, the mole had killed for him, often. Anthony Casso hadn't known their names for a long time, but in 1992, Casso read a book, Mafia Cop, a memoir by a former detective, and in the book, there was a photo. He recognized the faces immediately. Underneath were their names, Louis Ippolito and Stephen Caracappa. By 1994, the front page of the New York Daily News delivered a bombshell. The headline read, "Hero Cops or Hitmen?" Reporter Jerry Capezzi had published what sounded unthinkable. Anthony Gaspipe Casso, the feared Lucchese underboss, had named 2 NYPD detectives as his accomplices. For anyone who knew Ippolito, the idea that he might be a crooked cop wasn't shocking. But working directly for Anthony Gaspipe Casso, that was something else entirely. And as for Stephen Caracappa, the quiet administrator of the major case squad, nobody could have imagined him capable of such brutality. But without Casso's testimony, the case against the detectives vanished. Their murders, kidnappings, and betrayals would stay buried. Or so it seemed. On the morning of September 9th, 1996, federal agents knocked on the door of Bert Kaplan's brick home in Bensonhurst. When his wife opened the door, they found Kaplan in bed. Moments later, he was in handcuffs. Kaplan was charged with moving 24 tons of marijuana and 44 pounds of cocaine, along with tax fraud. In custody, agents pushed him to talk, to give up what he knew about the 2 retired NYPD detectives. Kaplan refused. At trial, witnesses detailed his smuggling empire. Even his family urged him to make a deal. But he wouldn't. The jury found him guilty. At 62, he was sentenced to 27 years, effectively life. His lawyer called him the last true believer in the code of the mafia, the omerta. Unlike the bosses who'd folded under pressure, Kaplan stayed silent. And with Casso discredited and Kaplan locked away, the FBI's case against Louis Ippolito and Stephen Caracappa went cold. For years, the files sat untouched. They might have stayed that way if not for a small-time Gambino associate named Frankie Heidel and one determined detective, Tommy Dades. Frankie Heidel did jobs like any other associate: robbery, extortion, petty deals. But after a murder gone wrong and a parole violation, he agreed to cooperate with law enforcement. That's how he met Detective Tommy Dades. At first, Frankie didn't like Dades, but over time, the hostility turned into trust. He told Dades small but valuable pieces of information. However, word soon got out that he was an informant. In early 1998, whispers spread through Staten Island. Detective Dades urged him to get off the street, to enter witness protection. Frankie refused. He thought his friends were just testing his loyalty. He didn't believe they would actually kill him. Days later, on April 27th, he was lured to a strip club. When he stepped into the parking lot after midnight, someone shot him 3 times. Frankie Heidel died. Detective Dades and his FBI partner took the news hard. They drove to his mother's house to break the news. Betty Heidel was devastated. Dades promised they'd find whoever killed her son. Over time, the two formed an unlikely friendship. Betty would call Detective Dades now and then, sometimes just to talk. But in one of those calls, years later, she said something that stopped Dades cold. It was September 2003. The conversation drifted to her older son, Jimmy Heidel, the one who disappeared back in 1986. Then, almost as an afterthought, Betty said she knew who had taken him. On the day Jimmy vanished, two plainclothes detectives came to her door, a fat one and a thin one. Years later, she saw the fat one on the Sally Jesse Raphael show promoting his book, Mafia Cop. She bought the book and learned their names, Luis Ippolito and Stephen Caracappa. That revelation sent Dades digging through 10 boxes of evidence that had sat untouched for years. He started connecting dots no one else had. Caracappa had taken a day off the very day diamond dealer Israel Greenwald vanished. He'd also made notes about Lucchese turncoat Anthony DeLappy just before the man was executed in Los Angeles. But the real breakthrough came from a digital breadcrumb. Dades found that on November 11, 1986, Caracappa had run a search for Nicky Guido. 44 days later, that innocent Nicky Guido was dead. It was the first hard proof that Casso had been telling the truth all along. After 9 years behind bars, Bert Kaplan was old, sick, and out of options. For nearly a decade, he'd refused every deal offered. But when investigators pressed again in 2004, Kaplan hesitated. He'd spent too long protecting men who probably wouldn't do the same for him. Deep down, he was afraid that if he didn't flip, Ippolito and Caracappa eventually would. And when they did, they'd point the finger at him. So Kaplan decided to do it first. With his cooperation, prosecutors finally had what they'd been missing for nearly 20 years: a credible insider who could prove that two NYPD detectives had secretly been working for the mafia. On March 9, 2005, nearly 20 years after they started working for Casso, Luis Ippolito and Stephen Caracappa were out for dinner in Las Vegas when agents closed in. Caracappa raised his hands without protest. Ippolito resisted before being forced to the ground. Hours later, agents raided Ippolito's home, finding 116 firearms, assault rifles, a sawed-off shotgun, a revolver engraved Mafia Cop Luis Ippolito, and pictures documenting Ippolito's ties with mobsters. The next day, the indictment was unsealed in Brooklyn. It accused the two of 8 murders, 2 attempted murders, kidnapping, money laundering, compromising state and federal investigations, and leaking the names of informants, 3 of whom were later killed. The Justice Department called it the most shocking case of police corruption in New York history. Across the country, Nicky Guido's mother saw the news. Her surviving son called her. "We never thought 18 years later this would turn up. We had left it alone." And for one man, the arrests meant freedom. Barry Gibbs, the postal worker framed for murder by Detective Ippolito, had spent 19 years in prison. When agents searched Ippolito's house, they found the original homicide file he'd taken when he retired. It was all the Innocence Project needed to reopen the case. Peter Mitchell, the original key witness, recanted, admitting he'd lied after being threatened by Ippolito. On September 29, 2005, Barry Gibbs walked out of court a free man. On March 6, 2009, Judge Jack Weinstein handed down the final sentences. Luis Ippolito was sentenced to life in prison plus 100 years with a $4.75 million fine. Stephen Caracappa received life in prison plus 80 years and a $4.25 million fine. Stephen Caracappa died behind bars in 2017, age 75. Luis Ippolito outlived his partner by 2 years. He died in 2019, age 71. Their former benefactor, Anthony Gaspipe Casso, remained in prison for more than 2 decades. He contracted COVID-19 in late 2020. He died from complications of the virus on December 15, 2020. It's unsettling to consider how differently things might have unfolded if Luis Ippolito hadn't chased the spotlight by publishing his book, Mafia Cop. Anthony Casso may never have been able to rat out his crystal ball, and if he hadn't sat under the studio lights of the Sally Jesse Raphael show, Betty Heidel might never have been able to tell police who took her son. 2 decisions driven by ego set off a chain reaction that exposed everything. 1 small decision. That's all it takes. Before we move to our next case, I want to ask you something. Are you still with me? If you are, drop a comment right now. Tell me which story so far has shocked you the most. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Because what's coming next is something you won't believe. On Saturday, December 13th, 2025, the Brown University campus was in the middle of finals week. Inside the Baruch and Holly building, students came and went throughout the day. The building's exterior doors were unlocked, as they typically were during daytime hours. Anyone could walk in. No ID, no security screening required, but someone had been watching the building for weeks, and it hadn't gone unnoticed. A custodian had seen an unusual person on campus multiple times, much older than a student, but not a professor or staff member. The custodian saw the strange man pacing the hallways, looking into classrooms, even ducking behind a bathroom to avoid being seen. But the custodian didn't find it unusual enough to report. Around 2 p.m., students began arriving for an economics review session in room 166, a large 186-seat auditorium-style classroom. The session was optional, led by a 21-year-old teaching assistant who wanted to help students prepare for their upcoming final. At approximately 4:03 p.m., as the review session was winding down, the door to room 166 opened. Someone rushing in with a last-minute question, but it was not a student. He was stocky, about 5'8", perhaps 200 pounds. He wore all black pants, a black jacket, black shoes, and a black medical face mask that concealed most of his features. On his head, he wore a black knit cap pulled low over his forehead. In his right hand, he carried a small black satchel. In his left, a 9mm handgun. As the gunman entered the room, he raised his weapon and opened fire without hesitation. He moved through the classroom, firing round after round. Students dove under desks, ran for exits. Some were frozen in terror. Others were hit before they could react. 2 students were killed. One of them wasn't even enrolled in the course. He simply came to help a friend prepare for the exam. 9 other students were wounded. The teaching assistant, miraculously, was unharmed. But the psychological damage to everyone in that room would last forever. The entire attack lasted less than 90 seconds. When the gunman's last magazine was empty, he calmly turned and walked out of room 166, exiting through the same door he had entered. He moved through a section of the building with limited surveillance coverage toward the Hope Street exit, and then he was gone. Almost as soon as the shots had been fired, students immediately started posting reactions on SideChat. an anonymous social media platform for college students, warning others of an active shooter. At 4:22 p.m., 19 minutes after the first shot was fired, Brown University Public Safety issued an alert. Active shooter near Baruch and Holly Engineering. Run, hide, fight, shelter in place. Providence Police, Rhode Island State Police, FBI agents, and tactical teams descended on Brown's campus within minutes. Helicopters circled overhead. SWAT teams swept through buildings. Officers went door to door, clearing classrooms and dorms, searching for any sign of the gunman. But the killer had vanished. Inside the Baruch and Holly building, he left behind an unimaginable scene of chaos and carnage. Pools of blood and shell casings littered the floor of room 166. At least 44 rounds of 9mm ammunition had been fired. The students who had survived hid in locked bathrooms and barricaded offices, terrified the shooter would return. Outside, thousands of students were evacuated from campus buildings. Many of them had fled their dorms without shoes, coats, or even phones, leaving their loved ones in the crippling position of not knowing if they were alive or dead. But while students were sheltering in terror, investigators were facing their own nightmare. They had almost nothing to go on. The students confirmed that the shooter had been wearing a mask and a hat to conceal any identifying features. When authorities checked the cameras, they discovered he had moved through parts of the building with limited camera coverage. Brown University had over 1,200 security cameras installed across campus, yet not a single one had captured a clear image of the gunman's face. The cameras did show the chaos after the shooting, the students running, the police response, the frantic evacuation. But they didn't show the shooter entering the building or leaving. The campus remained on lockdown throughout the night. Students on campus were too afraid to sleep. The entire East Side neighborhood was paralyzed with fear of a potential round two. Investigators worked through the night, reviewing every second of surveillance footage they could find. They canvassed the neighborhood, knocking on doors, asking residents if they had seen anything suspicious. They collected witness statements from students who had been in the building. They processed the crime scene, collecting shell casings, examining ballistic evidence, searching for any clue that might lead them to the killer. None of it helped. The shooter had been meticulous. He left no identification or personal items behind. Just 44 spent shell casings in a classroom of victims. By Sunday morning, the reality was clear. Whoever did this had planned it carefully, and he was still out there, possibly planning his next attack. At approximately 3:45 a.m. on Sunday, December 14th, less than 12 hours after the shooting, Providence Police received a tip. Investigators descended on a Hampton Inn in Coventry, Rhode Island, about 20 miles from Providence, detaining a man they described as a person of interest. Within 2 hours, Brown University finally lifted the shelter-in-place order. For a few hours, it seemed like the case might be solved. But by late Sunday night, the hope evaporated. The man detained at the Hampton Inn was released without charges. They got the wrong guy. Rhode Island Attorney General Peter Noronha held a press conference admitting that while some evidence had pointed to the initial person of interest, the investigation now points in a different direction. Chief Perez defended the detention, saying it was not a mistake, but just how investigations work. That wasn't how everybody felt. Multiple law enforcement sources told reporters that actually it was a mistake. They claimed that the investigation had to effectively restart after early missteps, and that the process had been set back by several hours. Every hour in an investigation like this is precious. Hours when the real shooter was getting further away, covering his tracks, possibly even fleeing the state. To the terrified public, it signaled the most worrying sign of all. Law enforcement had no idea who they were looking for. By the next day, investigators were back to square one. They released new images and video of a person of interest, a stocky man in dark clothing and a face mask walking through Providence's streets. But the footage was blurry, distant, and maddeningly vague. The man's face was completely obscured. His features were indistinguishable. The FBI announced a reward of up to $50,000 for information leading to the identification, arrest, and conviction of the shooter. They pleaded with the public for help. "We're looking for a moment that is shorter than someone taking a breath," Chief Perez said. At approximately 8:30 p.m. on Monday, December 15th, 2 days after the shooting, the situation escalated. In Brookline, Massachusetts, a quiet suburb just outside Boston, about 50 miles from Providence, police got an unexpected call. Shots had been fired on Gibbs Street in a residential building near Boston University. When officers arrived, they found 47-year-old Nuno F.G. Loureiro lying in the foyer of his apartment building, suffering from multiple gunshot wounds. Paramedics rushed him to Beth Israel Hospital, where he underwent emergency surgery, but it was too late to save him. Loureiro was pronounced dead early Tuesday morning, December 16th. Nuno Loureiro was an acclaimed physicist, a professor of nuclear science and engineering at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, the director of MIT's Plasma Science and Fusion Center, an incredibly accomplished scientist, not a student like the killings at Brown University. The FBI publicly stated that there was no known connection between the Brown shooting and the MIT professor's murder. It was just a terrible coincidence. Two horrific crimes in the same region within 48 hours. But that wasn't the whole truth. Behind the scenes, investigators were starting to notice troubling similarities between the cases. Both shootings were execution style. The victims of both shootings were connected to academia, and both crimes had been carried out with a high level of precision, with no obvious evidence left behind to track the killer. However, without concrete evidence linking the two cases, law enforcement treated them as separate investigations. The Brookline police launched a homicide inquiry into the murder of Loureiro, but they publicly maintained that the cases were unrelated. None of this settled the anxiety, especially for investigators. A college campus shooter was still at large, and a renowned MIT professor had been murdered, and law enforcement seemed no closer to solving either case. But that's because they simply hadn't been looking in the right place. On the same night Nuno Loureiro was murdered, an anonymous Reddit user logged onto the RR Providence subreddit and posted a comment in a thread about the Brown shooting. "I'm being dead serious. The police need to look into the gray Nissan with Florida plates, possibly a rental. That was the car he was driving." Under normal circumstances, a post like this might have been ignored. Reddit is full of amateur sleuths and armchair detectives. After the disastrous false accusations during the Boston Marathon bombing investigation in 2013, when Reddit users wrongly identified an innocent student as a suspect, the platform had become increasingly cautious about vigilante justice. But this one felt different. It wasn't vague or speculative. The Redditor wasn't suggesting specific people. He didn't say, "I think," or Maybe. He said, "Police need to look into this." Other Reddit users urged the Redditor to report the information to the FBI. One user wrote, "If you really saw this, you need to call the tip line now." The Redditor replied, "I already did." By this point, investigators had received hundreds of tips, nearly 200 of them considered actionable. The Redditor's tip was just one of many, and as a result, it was lost in a pile. But the next day, someone at the Providence Police Department saw the Redditor's comment. One detail immediately caught their attention: a gray Nissan with Florida plates, possibly a rental. Up until that moment, investigators had not connected any vehicle to the shooter. The Redditor's tip may have done exactly what authorities were struggling to do: identify a tangible piece of evidence that they could actually trace. If it was legitimate, investigators began combing through their surveillance footage, this time specifically looking for a gray Nissan sedan. They found one, captured on multiple cameras throughout the day on December 13th, moving through the streets near Brown's campus. Using license plate readers, investigators found multiple hits on a gray Nissan Sentra sedan with license plate 62DQEV from Florida in the area around Brown's campus on and leading up to December 13th. Flock cameras captured the Nissan 14 different times in the Providence area on December 1st, 12th, and again on the 13th, the day of the attack. Most telling of all, that day, the vehicle had been circling the neighborhood for hours before the shooting took place. With the license plate in hand, investigators traced the vehicle to Alamo Rental Car in downtown Boston. The car had been rented out on December 1st, nearly 2 weeks before the shooting. Detectives obtained security footage from the Alamo facility, and there, finally, they had what they desperately needed: a clear image of the renter's face. His name was on the rental agreement: Claudio Manuel Neves Valente, a 48-year-old Portuguese national. But before investigators could move forward, they needed to talk to the Redditor, who had led them to this suspect in the first place. The problem was, they still had no idea who he was. However, their investigation did lead them to a second person of interest who would break open the entire case. Investigators released security footage capturing this individual having some kind of confrontation with the prime suspect near the corner of Cook and Benevolent Streets, just 2 hours before the attack. That man, it turns out, was a homeless man and former Brown student who now often sleeps in the basement of the Baruch and Holly building. On Wednesday, December 17th, after seeing himself in the surveillance footage, the homeless student approached Providence police officers near Brown's University Alumni Hall. He told them he wanted to talk. He had information about the shooter. Officers immediately brought him to the police station for an interview and were surprised to discover that this homeless former student was also the Redditor who had drawn attention to the gray Nissan. Investigators have since referred to this man as John. What John told them was extraordinary. According to the affidavit, John's encounter with the shooter began at approximately 1:45 p.m. on Saturday, December 13th, more than 2 hours before the attack. John had been inside the Baruch and Holly building using a ground floor restroom across from the auditorium where the shooting would later occur. While in the restroom, John noticed another man inside wearing a surgical mask and dark clothing. John made eye contact with him, and immediately, something felt wrong. His clothing was inappropriate and inadequate for the weather. It was December in New England. The temperature was in the 30s. Yet this man was dressed as if he were trying to hide, not stay warm. John left the restroom, and soon after, so did the masked man. And then, as John later described it, a game of cat and mouse began. John followed the man outside, keeping his distance, watching him move through the residential streets around Brown's campus. The man walked to a gray Nissan sedan with Florida plates parked behind the Rhode Island Historical Society, just 3 blocks from the Baruch and Holly building. The man approached the car, unlocked it, looked inside, then locked it again, and walked away. John thought this was strange. Why would someone unlock their car, not get in or grab anything from it, then lock it again and keep walking? When John approached the car and peeked in the window, he noticed 2 fanny-style bags on the rear floorboard on the passenger side. The man circled the block. John kept following. Every time they made eye contact, the man changed direction, as if trying to lose or evade him. At one point, John called out to him, "Your car is back there. Why are you circling the block?" The man turned around. He stared at John, and then he responded, "I don't know you from nobody." Then repeatedly asked, "Why are you harassing me?" John decided to back off. He watched the man approach the Nissan one more time, then walk away again. John stopped following him after that. A little over 2 hours later, the shooting occurred. When John saw the surveillance images released by police, he immediately recognized the man. He went straight to Reddit and called the FBI tip line. During the police interview, detectives showed John 2 surveillance images of the suspect's vehicle. John exclaimed, "Holy shit, that could be it." They showed him footage from the Alamo rental car facility, including images of the man who rented the car. John recognized him as the same man he had encountered in the bathroom. Attorney General Peter Narana would later say, "He blew this case right open. When you crack it, you crack it." With John's testimony and the rental car records in hand, investigators now had a name to chase: Claudio Manuel Neves Valente. They ran his background, and what they found was both unexpected and deeply troubling. Neves Valente had a direct connection to Brown University. He had been enrolled as a graduate student in the physics PhD program from the fall of 2000 to the spring of 2001. He had taken a leave of absence in April 2001 and formally withdrew in July 2003, never completing his degree. He had no active affiliation with Brown for more than 2 decades, but there was more. Neves Valente had also attended the Instituto Superior Técnico in Lisbon, Portugal, between 1995 and 2000, studying for a degree in engineering physics. He graduated with a remarkable average score of 19 out of 20, an extraordinary achievement at one of Portugal's most demanding universities. That means he was at the university at the same time as Nuno Loureiro, the MIT professor who was murdered. They were classmates. They knew each other. Investigators had just stumbled onto the connection that linked the Brown shooting to the MIT professor's murder. Former classmates told investigators that Neves Valente had been brilliant but difficult. He frequently got into conflicts with fellow students, believing they were all incompetent compared to him. After leaving Brown, Neves Valente's academic career collapsed. A 1998 announcement in Portugal's official Diário da República referred to Neves Valente's appointment as a teaching assistant at IST. But then, A 2000 notice mentioned his termination from the role. Reporters later indicated that he had been dismissed from the position for unknown reasons. In 2017, Neves Valente won a U.S. green card through the Diversity Visa Lottery program, becoming a lawful permanent resident. He returned to the United States, and then, for reasons still unknown, he severed ties with his family in Portugal. 8 years later, in November 2025, Neves Valente was preparing for his attack. He rented a storage unit in Salem, New Hampshire on November 25th. He rented a hotel room in Boston on November 29th and 30th. And on December 1st, he rented a gray Nissan Sentra with Florida plates from Alamo in downtown Boston. For nearly 2 weeks, he circled Brown's campus, watching, planning, preparing. Security camera footage captured him on campus as early as November 28th. On December 13th, he walked into room 166 and opened fire. After fleeing Rhode Island, Neves Valente drove to Brookline, Massachusetts. Security footage captured him within a half-mile of MIT professor Nuno Loureiro's home and entering an apartment building in the vicinity on December 15th around 8:30 p.m. the night Loureiro was fatally shot. About an hour later, he was seen entering the Salem, New Hampshire storage facility where he had rented a unit. Now, on Thursday, December 18th, 5 days after the Brown shooting, investigators had identified their suspect. They had his name, his photo, and clear connections tying him to both murders. They had traced his movements through surveillance footage and license plate readers. But Neves Valente had been meticulous. After fleeing Rhode Island, he had swapped the Florida license plate on his rental car for Maine plates, attempting to evade detection. At approximately 9:00 p.m. on Thursday, December 18th, FBI SWAT teams executed court-authorized search warrants at the Salem storage facility. They found Neves Valente's body inside an empty unit next to the one he had rented. An autopsy conducted by the New Hampshire Medical Examiner's Office determined that Neves Valente had died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound on Tuesday, December 16th, the same day Nuno Loureiro succumbed to his injuries at the hospital. By the time investigators found the shooter, he had been dead for 2 days. Investigators also found his satchel containing 2 firearms and an electronic device containing 4 short video recordings. At a late-night press conference on Thursday, December 18th, Rhode Island Attorney General Peter Noronha and U.S. Attorney for Massachusetts, Lee Foley, announced their findings. The Connecticut State Police Forensic Science Laboratory had confirmed through DNA analysis and ballistics testing that one of the guns was involved in the mass shooting at Brown University, while the other was connected to Loureiro's death. The shell casings from the 2 crime scenes did not match, confirming that 2 different weapons were used. A preliminary DNA test established a match between Neves Valente and DNA obtained from evidence at Brown University. They confirmed he acted alone, but acknowledged that many questions remain unanswered. Why did he target Brown? Why that particular classroom? Why Nuno Loureiro? And what was his motive? The manhunt was over, but the mystery of why it happened was far from solved. Over the holidays, as Brown students scattered to their homes off campus, FBI agents spent their days analyzing the electronic device found with Neves Valente's body. It contained 4 short videos that Neves Valente had recorded in the storage unit after the murders. In the recordings, he confessed to the murders, though made no specific comment on the murder of the professor. He explained that he had been planning the Brown University shooting for a long time. At least 6 semesters, he said. And he made clear that Brown University was his intended target. But he refused to explain why. In fact, Neves Valente showed no remorse and no interest in explaining any of his actions, other than to say, "I'm not going to apologize because during my lifetime, no one sincerely apologized to me." The FBI has since released the video transcripts, but their contents remain open to interpretation. He acknowledged that the killings were, quote, "incompetent," and claimed that they were triggered by John's confrontation and that he had no real ideology. He said his only objective was to leave more or less on his own terms and to ensure that he wouldn't be the one who ended up suffering the most from all this. But he never mentioned his former classmate, Loureiro. Law enforcement sources have told ABC News that Neves Valente described having 20-year grudges that propelled him to buy guns and carry out shootings. But these aren't mentioned in the videos. Even with the recordings, investigators still don't have a clear motive. Why did he target Brown after more than 2 decades away from the university? Why did he shoot students who had no connection to him? Why Nuno Loureiro, a former classmate who had become a successful physicist? Some believe the answer lies in that last question. Neves Valente was clearly a genius in his classes, yet he had failed to achieve lasting professional success. Loureiro, on the other hand, went from success to success. The most popular theory is that Loureiro represented something that Neves Valente could never achieve. But law enforcement officials emphasized that Loureiro had no recent contact with Neves Valente and described the attack as a deliberate, unilateral act of criminal violence carried out against a victim unconnected to his personal or professional failures. And that brings us back to the central question of today's investigation. What was the small decision? For Neves Valente, was it the moment he decided not to complete his PhD at Brown? Was it the moment he was dismissed from his teaching position in Portugal? Was it the day he won that green card lottery and returned to the United States? Was it the first time he visited Brown's campus after 20 years and felt that old resentment resurface? One small decision. One moment where he chose to let a grudge fester instead of seeking help, and it led to the deaths of innocent people. On Wednesday evening, John, the homeless Redditor who solved the case, posted on Reddit one final time. "Respectfully, I have said all I have to say on the matter to the right people." He never revealed his real name. As of this video, he has given no interviews. He simply did what he thought was right and then disappeared back into anonymity. Providence Mayor Brett Smiley wrote to FBI Director Kash Patel requesting that John receive the full $50,000 reward offered for information leading to the suspect's identification and arrest. Fellow Reddit users on the IR Providence subreddit had already flooded the forum with praise for Reddit Guy. As of early January 2026, the FBI has not confirmed whether John will receive the reward. The Bureau maintains a long-standing policy not to comment on whether reward money has been paid and to whom. On January 5th, 2026, Rhode Island Hospital announced that all 9 victims who were treated for gunshot wounds had been discharged. The last victim was released in stable condition after spending more than 3 weeks in the hospital. All are expected to survive. Let me pause and ask you one final question before we finish today's investigation. If you've made it this far, if you're still watching, I need you to do something for me. hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and leave a comment telling me what you learned today. Because understanding these stories, understanding how one small decision can change everything, that's the only way we can recognize these moments in our own lives before it's too late. Now let me tell you about the final 2 cases. In July 2025, an extremely disturbing set of videos and images were uploaded to a shock site, the likes of which the internet had never seen. The videos showed a man who appears to be in his 30s being decapitated by another individual wearing a Guy Fawkes mask. The execution was methodical, prepared, filmed from multiple angles. What followed was the dismemberment of the body. The executioner worked with a level of ease, suggesting this was not his first time. The scene was prepared in a highly methodical way, with several phone cameras mounted on tripods, capturing the act from multiple angles. Among the photographs that accompanied the 3 videos, 2 images stood out. One shows certain organs prepared in a curry-like dish, suggesting cannibalism. The second shows the executioner holding the victim's severed head while taking a mirror selfie. This photo reveals key identifying features of the killer: a stocky, muscular build, a balding, middle-aged appearance, a scar above his left eyebrow, a dark birthmark running from his right bicep to the armpit, and a tattoo on the right bicep that translates to "that day 13 to 9. Vietnamese internet sleuths believe that before the video and images were leaked to the shock site, they first appeared on a private Chinese-language Telegram chat dedicated to the sharing and selling of graphic material. From a leaked screenshot, the chat shows the pricing for access to the images and videos: 98 yuan, $13 for partial access, and 198 yuan, $28 for premium access. While nothing was confirmed at the time, the available footage strongly suggests the act was driven by an intense carnal fixation, and the monetization of the footage appears to have been an afterthought. But regardless, there were more pressing questions. Who was the victim? When the videos first leaked to the public, they were spread quickly across Vietnamese forums, and online communities began investigating. Soon, one name surfaced: Nguyen Xuan Dot. Once his identity was suggested, internet sleuths located an inactive Facebook profile of the same name. The account's last post was dated June 10th, 2025, 1 month before the videos went viral. It read, "From now on, I'm logging off this account for good." Digging into the account's history, users found years of posts showing Dot repeatedly expressing a long-standing fixation. In 2022, he wrote, "Feeling bored. Might look for someone to call and chat about beheading. Anyone interested?" Users also discovered that Dot was a member of online male homosexual groups, including one named Likes Beheading. Many of the accounts interacting with him were anonymous profiles with the same paraphilia. Using Dot's online aliases, users found a thread on an anime adult entertainment forum known for hosting violent illustrated content. A translator there had posted a Vietnamese version of a manga titled Naked Headless Woman, noting it was translated per request by Mr. Hot Beheading. The manga depicted a scene in which a male character is decapitated by a woman at the height of physical pleasure and briefly remains conscious to describe the sensation. Many netizens speculated that Dot had become deeply fixated on this storyline and sought to replicate it. With Dot tentatively identified, attention shifted to the next major question. Where did the killing actually take place? The earliest clues came directly from the footage itself. A closer review of the butchering video revealed a small but significant detail. When the executioner panned the camera, a plastic water bottle briefly came into view. The label appeared similar to Lavi, a well-known Vietnamese brand. Another detail in the footage drew attention. A yellow bottle of dishwashing soap with Chinese characters on the label. Vietnamese forum users began comparing household items visible in the footage to everyday products used across Vietnam. Taken together, the Lavi bottle, the dish soap, and the kitchen tools, the emerging theory was that the killing happened in a Vietnamese province near the northern border. And if that was true, was the executioner a Vietnamese man living in that region? As speculation about the executioner intensified, the internet sleuths switched focus to piecing together a timeline. On Dot's Facebook account, there was a post from January 25th, 2025. 3 hours left until the execution. This date aligned with the final activity recorded on the beheading forum account. Also January 25th, 2025. The implication seemed clear. This was the day the killing took place. But there was a problem with that theory. This January 25th post wasn't the last post on Dot's Facebook account. That wouldn't be until months later, on June 10th, 2025. From now on, I'm logging off this account for good. If he truly died in January, how was he posting in June? This inconsistency led to one theory proposed by the online community. Dot's execution was on January 25th, 2025. But the executioner kept his phone and continued using it afterward, managing his accounts, reading his messages, and eventually posting the final status on June 10th. This theory gained more traction when an anonymous account released a screenshot of a chat log with Dot. The message, dated February 25th, 2025, stated simply that Dot had been beheaded. When pressed about what he knew, the anonymous account claimed he was familiar with the executioner and even provided a name: Chung. The sleuths began looking through Dot's Facebook friend list for anyone named Chung. Several profiles fit, and accusations spread quickly. One man in particular became a focus, largely because his profile was public and easy to inspect. Despite this, his online behavior drew attention. In 2022, he had liked one of Dot's posts about beheading. When the case went viral and users began tying his name to the incident, he quietly removed the like, but screenshots of it were already circulating. In the days after the videos spread, Dot's Facebook became flooded with comments, many from users outside of Vietnam who had just discovered the story. Then, in early August, something unexpected happened. The entire account was locked and became inaccessible. This only strengthened one uneasy theory: that the executioner himself had been watching the account, reading every comment, and finally locking it once the pressure became too much. After that, the case went quiet. The discussions thinned out, and no new clues surfaced. It seemed as though every possible lead had been exhausted, and most people assumed the investigation had reached its endpoint. But then, 2 months later, a sudden development emerged. In the third week of November, an anonymous Facebook account appeared in a group dedicated to the case and uploaded a set of chat logs and images that had never been seen before. These screenshots included direct conversations with Dot. The final message from Dot to this anonymous user was sent at 2:40 p.m. on January 25th, 2025. In the message, he said the execution would take place in 3 hours. Based on that timestamp, the killing likely occurred between 5:30 p.m. and 6:00 p.m. that same day. The anonymous individual released another set of screenshots, this time showing conversations with the executioner himself. These messages were linked to a Facebook account under the name Cam Dang Chung. That name matched the Chung mentioned repeatedly in Dot's earlier messages. The executioner, using this account, even sent the anonymous user an address for a potential meeting. However, rather than going to that location, the anonymous user suggested meeting at a cafe. The exchange indicated that the executioner was willing to meet in person, but also showed how casually he discussed arranging another possible beheading. Using the information released by the anonymous source, a Vietnamese YouTuber named Keto began piecing together a new digital trail. Working off the name Cam Dang Chung, he started tracing every account, comment, and digital footprint linked to it. He then posted a series of updates claiming he had located both the executioner and the site of the killing. However, within days, Keto posted again, this time saying he was stepping back from the investigation. He said that the people connected to the executioner were too powerful. He publicly warned that if anything happened to him, all the doxing information would be released automatically. But before withdrawing, he uploaded one last image and a hint, a distorted screenshot of the username the executioner supposedly used across anonymous forums. And according to him, it was the name of the executioner's own son. That hint was enough. On the morning of November 20th, online investigators sprang into action. First, they removed the distortion on the image, uncovering a username, Dang Chung 1111. From there, the pattern unraveled quickly. Variations of the same handle, Dang Chung with 5s, with 4s, with 3s, all appearing on multiple anonymous platforms, including Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and several smaller forums. Then another username appeared in the network, Doan Sang LS. This account showed direct links to the Dang Chung profiles. When users searched directly for facebook.com Donsangles, the result was immediate. A public Facebook profile appeared, showing a full face, a location, and an occupation, all under the name Dan. Was this it? Was this their guy? Online investigators started digging. They quickly uncovered his full name, Doan Van Sang, and learned that by 2025, he was already retired at age 59. His former role was significant. He had served as the Deputy Principal of Market Management Department No. 4, located in Lang Son Province, Vietnam, one of the northern provinces previously mentioned. Another detail stood out. He wasn't just a retired civil servant. He was the clan head of the Dong family in Lang Son, one of the region's largest clans, with thousands of members. This was not an anonymous figure living on the margins. He was a man with deep community ties and an established public presence. Photos resurfaced showing him at a government-organized event in December 2024, where he delivered a legal training lecture as part of his duties. Scrolling through his Facebook profile, investigators found that Sang had 2 sons. The older one was highly active on social media. He frequently posted images of his student ID, name tags, and personal information, unintentionally making it simple to confirm his real name, Dang Chung. A detail that immediately caught people's attention. given the online username Dangchung11111 that had led them here in the first place. Then came a shocking coincidence. The son's birthday was September 13th, a date that aligned all too well with the tattoo on the executioner's right bicep. That day, 13-9. Was the tattoo referencing the birthday of the executioner's son? Or perhaps was the executioner actually the son who had his own birthday tattooed on his arm? The son's build did not match the executioner's heavy frame, and his hair was full and styled, nothing like the receding hairline of the balding executioner. But what about the father? As more clues surfaced, attention returned to Doan Sang. The usernames, tattoo, proximity to the northern border region, and the physical resemblance. Put together, they painted a coherent picture. And so, for the moment, Doan Van Sang became the community's primary suspect. The next thing they found was that Sang frequently used his verified social media accounts to follow his own anonymous accounts. And the anonymous accounts followed him back. On his official TikTok profile, Doan Sang LS66, users noticed it was following another account named Dangchung424. That account, in turn, used a profile photo taken directly from the Facebook page of Kam Dangchung. This created a clear chain. Doan Sang LS, Dangchung 1111/424, Kam Dangchung. The same name identified by the anonymous source as the executioner that Dot had put them in contact with. Then came another discovery. Members of the online community attempted to initiate password recovery for two emails, doansangles igmail.com and dangchung111@gmail.com. Both prompted the same verification request, confirmation through an Oppo Reno 12 5G device. That coincidence became even more striking when they tried recovering the email linked to Dot's phone number. This attempt also triggered verification through the same Oppo Reno 12 5G phone. Three identities: Doan Sang LS, Dangchung 1111, and the account linked to Dot's contacts, all traced back to one device. Repeated attempts produced another detail. Google requested secondary verification through a phone number ending in 62. On Sang's Facebook page, the number he publicly listed ended with the same two digits. At this point, every thread was pointing back to the same person. The anonymous source added another piece. They claimed that 2 years earlier, the account Kam Dangchung had sent them personal photos and messages to initiate contact. Although the account is now locked, the forwarded images remain, and the man in them is Doan Van Sang. As users combed through Sang's old posts, they even overlaid a medical mask similar to the one in the execution video on photos of Sang. Once the mask was placed, it seemed the hairline and eye shape aligned closely with the executioner seen in the videos. A second Facebook account belonging to Sang had already been locked by late November, but not before someone archived a photo of him sitting in his workplace while wearing a mask. When compared with the executioner, the shape of the receding hairline was noticeably similar. Then came a more decisive match. A composite image circulated online showing 3 everyday photos of Sang placed beside a still frame of the executioner. All 4 images displayed the same circular birthmark on the outer left shin. Another composite showed a second match, a birthmark on the front of the right shin, appearing in both the executioner's image and a casual photo posted by Sang. The most significant comparison focused on the right bicep. In the executioner's video, a dark birthmark extended upward toward the armpit. On Sang's Facebook, Users found 2 photos where his sleeve shifted just enough to reveal the same distinctive mark in the same place. And finally, the tattoo on the executioner's arm, that day 13-9, were clearly visible. A photo on Tsang's page showed him with a tattoo in a similar spot. The details of the tattoo were unclear, and it wasn't certain whether the camera had mirrored the orientation. But the positioning was enough to raise suspicion. At this point, the physical markers were piling up. Not just similar facial features or clothing, but birthmarks and tattoos with matching locations and digital accounts, all tied together and leading to the same cell phone. Each piece alone proved nothing. Together, they formed a profile that was becoming impossible to dismiss, especially once online investigators began comparing the executioner's surroundings to places linked with Don Van Sang. In one of his TikTok videos, a green wooden door appeared behind him, a door nearly identical to the one visible in the butchering video. Then another match surfaced. On the official website of the Agency for Domestic Market Surveillance and Development, users found an article featuring a photograph of Sang at work. When the image was enlarged, the background revealed red patterned wall tiles and white counter tiles, the same design seen in the kitchen of the butchering footage. This raised the possibility that the killing took place inside a market management department office. Online investigators continued to dig through publicly available MMD reports and images. Records show that Sang had previously worked at Team Number 5, and before retiring in 2025, he served as deputy head of Team Number 4. Since MMD teams rotate duties, he would have had easy access to multiple office spaces in Langsun. Finally, a local resident stepped forward with a critical piece of information. They noted that the address where Cam Dang Chung had arranged to meet the anonymous friend of Dot sits only a short distance from the old Team Number 5 office. The resident also mentioned that the MMD office was known for keeping aggressive guard dogs, something that aligned with the frequent sound of barking in the videos. As online investigators examined the videos more closely, they realized that the rehearsal clip and the butchering video may have been filmed in different locations. Several background details lined up with near-perfect precision. The same plastic plant, the same pair of cabinet knobs, the same uneven gap between 2 cupboards, and even a fan with distinctive blue blades. When viewers matched Sang's TikTok frame by frame against Google Street View images of the Team Number 3 office, the similarities were overwhelming. The same white door, the same red brick pillars, the same decorative framework under the roofline, even the same climbing vines, and the distant red tile roof appeared in both clips. This suggested a clearer timeline. Dot met the suspect at the Team Number 3 office for the rehearsal, then was brought to another site for the butchering video. A question remained. Why commit such a horrible act at a government office? To understand that, it helps to look at the timing and the suspect's position. He occupied a senior position within the MMD, which meant unrestricted access to the building and its facilities, and the date believed to be the day of Dot's death, January 25th, coincided with the 26th day of the final lunar month and the first day of the Lunar New Year holiday. During this holiday, government offices are vacant because people take 7 to 10 days off to return to their hometowns and visit family. Inside the office, the suspect would have had access to everything he needed: a kitchen fully supplied with cookware, a furnace-like incinerator used for destroying confiscated goods, but capable of eliminating other material if someone intended to do so. As the internet became more and more certain of the killer's identity, the pressure mounted. By the evening of November 20th, after months of silence, online activity around the case surged, and the accounts belonging to Doan Van Sang and his son, Dang Chung, began behaving erratically. Both accounts suddenly entered a Facebook group dedicated to tracking the case and started posting directly into the discussion. From Sang's account, a disturbing message appeared. "I am the executioner. Who can catch me? Let me tell you straight. You are the real executioners because you want more people to die so you can celebrate. Isn't that right? I lived 60 years in this world. I'm no longer afraid of death." He escalated further by saying, "Who exposed me? Show yourself, and anyone who wants to meet me is invited to my house." It was a bizarre shift in tone, aggressive and almost taunting. But why would someone already under suspicion post messages that only deepened the suspicions around him? What would drive a man to taunt the very public trying to bring him to justice? Later, Sang tried to downplay his presence in the group, commenting he had only just found out about it because people tagged him. But that wasn't true. A group member had already saved screenshots of his activity, showing that his account had been in the group earlier and had interacted with posts before November 20th. In one example from early November, when someone complained about the lack of progress in finding the executioner, Sang reacted to the post with a laughing emoji. But it wasn't only Sang losing control. His son, Dang Chung, posted a picture with the status taunting the online community. "Come on, it's just a few pieces of human meat." Within the hour, the father and son deleted all of these posts. But of course, screenshots of them were already circulating. Had it finally dawned on them how much evidence the internet really had on them? How safe did Sang believe he was? Was he convinced that even if the internet exposed him, nothing would happen? That he was untouchable? For a while, it looked as though he might be right, but events progressed far more quickly than anyone expected. On November 23rd, after weeks of collecting images, posts, chat logs, and geolocation clues, a Vietnamese Facebook group called On Set compiled their findings into an 88-page report on Google Drive and released it to the public. 4 days later, on November 27th, they released an expanded English translated version, a 106-page file laying out every step of the investigation. As we began digging deeper into the case, the situation in Vietnam started shifting fast. On November 28th, the Tien Hung Commune Police issued an urgent public notice. The warning addressed a document circulating online referring to the community's original 88-page Vietnamese investigation file. According to police, malicious individuals are deliberately amplifying information, inciting violence, and causing extremely harmful psychological effects on viewers. They went as far as to insinuate that the 88-page document contained pre-installed malware that steals accounts, steals money, and commits fraud. Citizens were ordered not to share such content under any circumstances, and if they did, they would be breaking the law. Anyone who received the file was instructed to delete it immediately and quietly report the sender. The public was also instructed to only receive information from official sources and to report accounts or pages spreading fake news. Within hours, state newspapers echoed the same warning. Some Vietnamese content creators even amplified it themselves, urging their viewers to avoid the document at all costs. A graphic poster spread online, claiming that anyone who clicked the file risked losing control of their social media accounts, having their data stolen, their devices encrypted for ransomware, or being used to scam friends and family. The message was clear. Authorities did not want the public accessing the community's investigation. On Reddit, a user described what came next: old posts disappearing, accounts wiped without explanation, and state newspapers threatening that anyone sharing the document's link could face fines up to 5 million dong. Inside the Onset group, the same message circulated: stop sharing the files or risk consequences. For many following the case, the government's response was a clear attempt to control the situation. Vietnam remains under a one-party communist system where news outlets are state-aligned and often frame information in ways to support official narratives. Even so, the attempt to suppress the community's investigation ultimately had the opposite effect. Instead of containing the story, it highlighted just how much information had already been uncovered without official involvement. According to a Reddit user, Vietnam's online community had been trying to get police to investigate Dot's murder since July 2025. Contacting officers, local authorities, and even Dot's surviving family. At the time, authorities showed no interest in handling the case despite multiple warnings. It wasn't until November, when online investigators exposed that the murderer was a member of the Communist Party, that the police acknowledged the case at all. This sequence of events left many observers questioning the government's priorities. By November 28th, the investigation had moved to a very public display of state action. Local reporters confirmed that police forces had arrived at the former headquarters of Market Management Team Number 4. The building, abandoned after the agency's reorganization earlier in the year, was suddenly sealed off. Its front gate was locked, the perimeter reinforced with barbed wire. All the while, officials refused to reveal the reason for the police presence in the area. Word spread quickly. A large crowd gathered outside the gate, dense enough to slow traffic through the narrow residential area. The following evening, on November 29th, the police presence intensified. Dozens of officers and multiple government-plated vehicles arrived as mobile police units were deployed to maintain order. Barricades and caution tape were set up to block the road leading into the area. That same day, another set of news described police efforts to locate Wen Shuan Dot. On November 27th, officers visited his family home, though they offered no explanation for why they were looking for him or what triggered the inquiry. Dot's mother said her son had been missing for a decade. After his father passed away, he left home, never contacted her again, and no one in the village had seen him since. As police attempted to steer the narrative, the limits of that approach became visible. So they released just enough information to satisfy the growing pressure. On November 30th, a screenshot began circulating online of a leaked report believed to be an internal police summary of their involvement in the case. According to that report, authorities first detected the videos and photographs on November 25th. Notably, 2 days after the internet sleuths had released their 88-page document. Aside from the videos and images, police apparently discovered online groups who had identified the victim as Wen Shuan Dot and the perpetrator as Don Van Sang. On November 27th, forensic examiners reviewed the footage and found no signs of AI generation. Then, on November 28th, police received a statement from Dot's village chief and collected a hair sample from Dot's mother for DNA comparison. That same day, investigators conducted an on-site examination at the workplace of Market Management Team Number 4. Inside Team Number 4 offices, police apparently found a kitchen and restroom matching the layout seen in the beheading video. Beneath the sinks and inside the drains, they recovered 3 suspected human teeth and multiple bone fragments. All were sent for forensic analysis. Later that day, police searched Sang's residence and seized 2 jackets resembling the one worn in the footage prior to the killing, along with a heater identical to the one visible in the earlier portion of the beheading video. Investigators also recovered Dot's phone from Sang's sister. She reportedly told police Sang had given it to her. The leaked report also stated that during initial questioning by police, Sang confessed. He allegedly told investigators he met Dot online around 2020 through a website dedicated to extreme content involving people seeking staged deaths. Dot repeatedly expressed his wish to be beheaded and even offered money to rent a location for it. By mid-2024, Sang agreed to carry out Dot's request. On January 25, 2025, he called Dot to the MMD Team Number 4 office, where Dot arrived with 2 knives. That evening, Sang killed him, dismembering the body, boiled portions to delay decomposition, smashed the bones, and distributed the remains into roughly 10 bags. Some, he said, he fed to his dogs. The rest, he discarded across temporary garbage sites. 2 days later, he claimed to have thrown the knives onto a tow truck parked along the roadside. A Reddit user claimed the leaked document wasn't an accident at all. He said that authorities themselves released it, not to inform the public, but to quiet them. In his words, the leak was meant to show that the police had taken action while carefully suppressing every other detail of the investigation. Police did not confirm whether the leaked screenshots came from inside the department, although they did not dispute it either. 3 days later, the government released its first official statement. On December 3, 2025, the Ministry of Public Security published an official statement. The article included a single photograph, Doan Van Sang, in handcuffs between 2 officers. The ministry confirmed what the internet community had been reporting for months, that Sang had murdered Wen Shu and Dot, and after the killing, attempted to erase every trace of the crime through cleaning, disposal, and general destruction of evidence. According to the document, investigators issued a decision to prosecute and an arrest warrant for Sang on November 29, 2025, on charges of murder. But even as they confirmed the suspect and the crime, the ministry maintained one part of an earlier narrative. The community-circulated case file, they said, was still harmful, still dangerous, still not to be shared. This case is only now beginning to gain international recognition. But beneath the surface, it is far more complicated than it first appears. Wen Shu Dot was a deeply vulnerable man in need of help. And somewhere along the way, the system failed him. And that same system then seemed ready to protect the man who killed him. Without the relentless work of Vietnam's online community, it is unclear when, or even if, Doan Van Sang would ever have been brought to justice. Despite repeated warnings and threats, Vietnamese netizens refused to be silenced. Even now, they continue to investigate the remaining unanswered questions of this case, such as, had Sang claimed other victims besides Dot? And did Sang act alone in Dot's murder? Their plea for help to bring this case to the attention of the outside world has done more than expose a horrific crime. It has revealed how the people of Vietnam are forced to fight not only for truth, but for their right to speak it. However, we would be naive to think that this is a problem isolated to just one country. There have always been those in wealth and power who suppress information and skew narratives to their advantage. So we must be critical of what we are told before accepting it as fact. After all, there is always more than one side to any story. And the truth is out there. Sometimes it just takes some digging to find it. If you've made it this far, I want to thank you. This video has been one of the most difficult we've ever produced, not just because of the content, but because of what it represents. The fragility of life, the weight of choices, the thin line between order and chaos. Before you go, I need you to do 3 things. First, hit that like button. Second, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. And third, leave a comment telling me what you learned today. Tell me about a small decision you've made that changed your life, or tell me which story shocked you the most. Because these stories matter. And the only way we can prevent them from happening again is by understanding them, by recognizing the moments that matter, by making better choices. Thank you for watching. And remember, one small decision can change everything.